Hey there, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I'm so glad you're here with him again. On this channel, I share real stories from park rangers who've seen things in the deep woods that they can't explain, the kind of tales that might help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we start tonight's story, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment and let him know. Now, go ahead and get comfortable. Maybe grab a cozy blanket and let's wander into tonight's forest story together. The dead girl's photo was still warm when I pulled it from the camera. That should have been my first warning. Photos don't come out warm. Not unless something's very wrong with your equipment or something else entirely is messing with your gear, but I was too focused on the search to think straight. 3 days hunting for the Martinez family in Big Bend, and this was the first real lead we'd found. The girl in the picture couldn't have been more than 8. Dark hair, bright smile, wearing a yellow dress that looked too clean for someone who'd been missing in the desert for 72 hours. She was standing next to a prickly pear cactus about 50 yards from where I'd taken the shot. Problem was, when I looked up from the photo to that exact spot, nobody was there. My name's Ray Hoffman, and I used to be a cop. Used to be a lot of things before I screwed them all up. Now I'm a search and rescue ranger in the middle of nowhere, Texas, which is exactly where a man like me belongs. Far away from the temptation to do the wrong thing for what I told myself were the right reasons. The desert was dead quiet that morning. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get in the woods back east. This was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your skin crawl. No birds, no insects. Even the wind had stopped, leaving the air thick and still like something was holding its breath. I'd been taking pictures of the search area since dawn, documenting everything like I learned to do back when I carried a badge instead of a rescue pack. Old habits die hard, especially the ones that got you in trouble in the first place. See, I had this thing about evidence. I was real good at finding it. Sometimes I was so good at finding it that I'd find evidence that wasn't really there to begin with. That's why I'm out here instead of working homicide in Chicago, planting evidence. To nail a guy I knew was guilty seemed like justice at the time. Turns out the law doesn't see it that way, even when you're right about the guy being a killer. Funny how doing the wrong thing can follow you even when you're trying to do right. The Martinez family had been camping near the Rio Grande when they vanished. Mom, Dad, and little Carmen. Park Service found their campsite intact. Food still on the table, sleeping bags still laid out, car keys in the ignition. Like they'd just gotten up and walked into the desert without taking anything, without telling anyone, without leaving so much as a footprint to follow. I'd been working the search grid for 3 days, taking photos of every inch of ground, every broken branch, every disturbed rock, looking for the kind of evidence that would tell a story, the kind of real evidence I should have stuck to finding instead of creating my own back in Chicago. The camera clicked again in my hands. I hadn't meant to take another shot, but my finger seemed to press the button on its own. The photo slid out, and I waited for it to develop, watching the chemicals slowly reveal what the lens had captured. This time it was the father, Miguel Martinez, standing in the same spot where his daughter had been in the previous photo. He was looking right at the camera, right at me, with an expression I'd seen too many times in my years working homicide. It was the look people get when they know something terrible is about to happen to them. I looked up from the photo. The desert stretched empty in every direction, heat waves dancing on the horizon like ghosts. But Miguel Martinez wasn't there. Just like his daughter, he'd somehow been in my camera without being in the world. My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the morning cold. I'd seen a lot of strange things in 15 years of police work, but I'd never seen people show up in photos when they weren't actually there. Equipment malfunction, maybe. Some kind of double exposure. Had to be something simple and logical, because the alternative was impossible. I checked my camera settings. Everything normal. I examined the film pack. Fresh, properly loaded. I even took a picture of my own boots to make sure the camera was working right. The photo came out perfect. Clear image of my worn hiking boots against the sandy ground. But when I looked at the Martinez photos again, they'd changed. Now both the father and daughter were in the same shot, standing together next to that prickly pear cactus, and they weren't alone anymore. Something was standing behind them in the shadows, something tall and wrong-shaped that made my detective brain scream danger, even though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. The radio on my belt crackled to life. making me jump. Static filled the air, then a voice came through, a woman's voice, speaking Spanish in a frightened whisper. No se acerque, no tome más fotos, don't come closer, don't take more pictures. I grabbed the radio. Hello, this is Ranger Hoffman. Who is this? Are you injured? More static, then silence. I looked at the photo again. The shadow behind the family had moved. It was clearer now, more defined. Something with red eyes and too many teeth, crouched like it was getting ready to spring. That's when I realized the Martinez family wasn't missing at all. They were trapped. The next photo nearly stopped my heart. I hadn't taken it. I was absolutely sure of that. But there it was, sliding out of my camera like an accusation. The image showed me from behind, standing exactly where I was right now, holding the previous photos and staring at them with the same expression of growing horror that I felt crawling up my spine. Someone or something was taking pictures of me taking pictures. I spun around, scanning the desert in every direction. Nothing but rocks and cacti and endless empty sand. The nearest high ground was half a mile away, too far for anyone to get a clear shot with a camera, and definitely too far to somehow make that photo appear in my equipment. But the photo was real. I could feel its weight in my hands, see the chemical smell of fresh development still hanging in the air. In the background of the image, barely visible in the shadows of a creosote bush, something was watching me, something that shouldn't exist. My radio crackled again. This time it was a man's voice, speaking in accented English. The camera sees what should not be seen. Who is this? I demanded, keying the mic. Identify yourself. Are you in need of assistance? Static answered me. Then the voice came back, clearer now. We tried to warn people, tried to make them stop taking pictures, but they never listen. I recognized the voice now. Miguel Martinez, the missing father. But Miguel Martinez had been gone for 3 days, and there was no way his radio signal could reach me from wherever he was. Unless wherever he was wasn't actually aware at all. My detective training kicked in, the same methodical thinking that had served me well before I let corruption destroy my career. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to piece together the evidence, even if that evidence was impossible. The photos, that was the key. Whatever was happening revolved around the photographs. I laid them out on a flat rock and studied them like crime scene evidence. The first showed little Carmen Martinez. The second showed her father. The third showed both of them together, with something lurking behind them. The fourth showed me, taken by someone or something I couldn't see. And now, as I watched, a fifth photo was developing in my hands even though I hadn't taken one. This image showed the Martinez family's campsite, but not as the Park Service had found it. In this version, the tents were shredded. The picnic table was overturned, and there were drag marks in the sand leading away from the site. Drag marks that ended at what looked like a hole torn in the air itself. Jesus Christ, I whispered. The radio buzzed with static, then Miguel's voice returned. He cannot help you now. Only the truth can help you. I keyed the mic with trembling fingers. Miguel, if that's really you, tell me what happened. Tell me where your family is. We are here, came the reply. We are always here now, in the pictures, trapped in the moments between light and shadow. I looked at the photos again. In the first image, Carmen wasn't smiling anymore. She was pointing at something beyond the frame, her mouth open in a silent scream. In the second photo, Miguel was running, looking back over his shoulder at something pursuing him. The pictures were moving, changing, telling a story frame by frame, like some nightmare movie. How? I asked the radio. How is this possible? La Bestia Miguel's voice came back, barely audible through the static. The beast, it feeds on captured moments, on stolen light. Every photograph feeds it, makes it stronger. I felt something cold run down my spine despite the desert heat. Back in Chicago, I'd heard rumors about things that didn't belong in police. Reports, cases that got buried because they couldn't be explained. Murders where the only evidence was impossible, where the crime scenes defied everything we knew about reality. I'd always assumed those stories were just cops trying to make sense of senseless violence. Now I was beginning to understand that some crimes couldn't be solved because they weren't committed by anything human. My camera clicked again without my touching it. Another photo slid out, this one showing a close-up of massive claws raking across the side of a tent. The tears in the fabric looked fresh, like they'd just been made. And in the reflection on one of the metallic tent grommets, I could see an eye. A red eye with a vertical pupil, staring directly at the camera, directly at me. The desert around me had grown completely silent. Even the constant buzz of insects that I'd been hearing all morning had stopped. The air felt thick and wrong, like the moments before a thunderstorm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I started backing away from the photos, but my feet felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud instead of sand. The camera in my hands was getting warm, almost hot. The metal casing was beginning to burn my palms. "Don't run." Miguel's voice came through the radio, clearer now than any normal transmission had a right to be. "Running just makes it hunt faster. It can smell fear through the lens. What does it want?" I called out to the empty desert. "Pictures," came the reply. "Moments, lives. It collects them all, and now it wants yours." I looked down at the photos scattered on the rock. They'd changed again. Now they showed a sequence. The Martinez family setting up camp, something stalking them. From the shadows, the attack, and finally their disappearance into what looked like a tear in reality itself. But there was one more photo developing now, one that showed my own future. Me, lying motionless in the sand, my camera beside me, my eyes staring sightlessly at the sky, and standing over my body, finally clear enough to see in horrible detail, was something that had once been human but had become something else entirely. Something with red eyes and claws like razors and a hunger that could never be satisfied. The beast was no longer hiding in the shadows of my photographs. It was stepping out of them. The thing that emerged from my camera flash was wrong in every way something could be wrong. It stood about 7 feet tall, with grey skin that looked like it had been stretched too tight over bones that didn't fit together right. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that had too many fingers tipped with black claws. But it was the eyes that made my brain try to shut down completely. Red eyes that glowed like heated metal, sitting in a face that kept shifting between human and something reptilian. I'd seen a lot of monsters in my years as a cop. Wife beaters, child killers, the kind of human garbage that makes you lose faith in the species. But this was the first time I'd seen something that had never been human at all. It smiled at me, with a mouth full of needle teeth, and when it spoke, its voice came from my radio instead of its throat. "Detective Hoffman," it said, using my old title like a curse. "I have been waiting for you, waiting for someone who understands the value of evidence." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The camera in my hands was burning hot now, but I couldn't let go of it. My fingers were locked around the casing like it had become part of my body. "You planted evidence." The thing continued, taking a step closer. Its feet made no sound on the sand, left no tracks. "You created false truths to convict the guilty. How deliciously ironic that you should be the one to document my work." Another photo slid out of my camera without my taking it. This one showed a crime scene from my past, the apartment where I'd placed a knife to make sure a killer went to prison. The photo was perfect, showing every detail exactly as it had been that night 3 years ago. "How?" I managed to whisper. "I see everything the camera sees," it replied. "Every moment ever captured, every light ever stolen and frozen in silver and chemicals. Your corruption calls to me, detective. Your willingness to alter the truth makes you perfect for my purposes." The beast reached into what looked like empty air and pulled out another photograph. This one showed the Martinez family as they really were. Not missing, not lost, but imprisoned somewhere that existed only in the spaces between camera shutters. They were alive but trapped, living the same terrified moments over and over. "Again, they came here to take pictures of the beautiful desert," the creature explained, almost conversational now. "Vacation photos, family memories." They had no idea they were feeding me with every flash, every click of the shutter. Modern cameras are so much more efficient than the old ways. I thought about all the photos I'd taken over the past 3 days, hundreds of them, each one feeding this thing, making it stronger. "What are you?" I asked. "I am documentation," it said. "I am evidence. I am every photograph ever taken and every truth ever captured or created. I exist in the moment between what was and what is recorded, and I am very, very hungry." The beast gestured to my camera. "Take my picture, detective. Document the truth of what I am. Add me to your evidence file." "No," I said, finally finding the strength to back away. "I won't feed you anymore." It laughed, a sound like glass breaking in reverse. "You have been feeding me for days. Every photo you've taken, every moment you've captured, has made me more real. more solid, more able to exist in your world, instead of just in the spaces between light and shadow. I looked at my camera and realized it was true. The display showed 847 photos taken since I'd started the search. 847 moments stolen from reality and fed to this monster. Besides, the beast continued, you cannot stop taking pictures anymore. Then you could stop planting evidence. It is what you are. It is what defines you. The need to document, to preserve, to control the truth. My finger moved toward the camera button against my will. The urge to photograph this impossible thing was overwhelming. Here was evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Proof of the supernatural that any investigator would kill to document. The beast nodded approvingly. Yes, you understand. You cannot resist. The camera calls to you like corruption called to you before. One more photo. One more piece of evidence. Just one more, and then you'll have proof of everything. I fought against my own hand, but the detective in me was stronger than my fear. I needed evidence. I needed proof. I needed to document what I was seeing, because that's what I did. I collected evidence, even when I had to create it myself. My finger pressed the button. The flash went off like a small sun, and in that brief moment of blazing light, I saw the truth. The beast wasn't just one creature. It was dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all existing in the same space, overlapping like multiple exposures on the same frame of film. Each one was someone who had been consumed, their essence trapped and transformed into part of this collective nightmare. And in the center of them all, I saw myself, not as I was now, but as I would become. Another evidence-gathering monster, another part of the beast that fed on captured moments and stolen light. The photo that slid out of my camera showed all of this. Every horrifying detail, every impossible truth. But as I watched, the image began to change. My future self in the picture turned its red eyes toward me and smiled. "Welcome to the collection, detective," it said, its voice coming from both the photo and the beast standing before me. "Time to add yourself to the evidence file." The camera in my hands was no longer just hot, it was molten. The plastic was melting, fusing with my skin. I tried to scream, but the only sound that came out was the mechanical whir of a camera, advancing to the next frame. Behind me, I heard the sound of multiple shutters clicking in sequence, like a dozen photographers all taking pictures at once. When I turned around, I saw them transparent figures with cameras for faces, documenting my transformation with the same methodical precision I'd once used to document crime scenes. The beast that had once been the Martinez family, that had once been dozens of other victims, that was about to include me, smiled with its many mouths. Now, it said, "Let us document your disappearance. Let us create the evidence of what happened to Detective Ray Hoffman, and let us make sure, all good evidence, that it tells exactly the story we want it to tell." The last thing I saw before the camera flash consumed everything was my own reflection in the beast's red eyes. Not Ray Hoffman the corrupt cop, or Ray Hoffman the search and rescue ranger, but Ray Hoffman the evidence, Ray Hoffman the photograph, Ray Hoffman the captured moment, frozen forever in silver and light and horror. I woke up inside a photograph. That's the only way I can describe it. Everything around me had the flat, static quality of a printed image. The colors were too bright, the shadows too sharp, the edges of things slightly blurred like they'd been captured by a camera with a shallow depth of field. I was standing in the Martinez family's campsite, but not as it existed in the real world. This was the campsite as it appeared in photographs, perfect, frozen, eternal. The tent fabric didn't move in any breeze because there was no breeze here. The shadows didn't shift because the sun never moved. Time itself had been captured and imprisoned in this moment, between the click of a shutter and the development of film. Carmen Martinez was there, still wearing her yellow dress, still 8 years old, still smiling the same smile she'd been smiling when her family's vacation photos were taken 3 days ago. But her eyes were wrong. They had the red glow of the beast, and when she looked at me, I saw the hunger that lived in captured light. "Welcome to the collection," she said in a voice that was hers, but also somehow belonged to the thing that had consumed her. "Isn't it beautiful here? Everything is perfect. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever dies." Her parents stood nearby, frozen in the act of setting up their camp. They moved with the jerky, unnatural motion of stop-motion animation, repeating the same actions over and over again. Miguel hung a lantern. On a hook, Maria unpacked sleeping bags. Miguel hung the lantern again. Maria unpacked the same bags again. An endless loop of captured moments playing on repeat. This is what happens to evidence, Carmen explained, skipping closer to me with movements that stuttered like frames missing from a film reel. This is where all the documented moments go. This is where truth lives forever. I tried to move, tried to run, but my body responded like I was wading through thick liquid. Everything here operated according to the rules of photography rather than physics. Motion was captured in discrete frames. Reality existed only in the spaces between shutters. I don't belong here, I said, my voice echoing strangely in the photograph space. I'm not evidence. I'm not a captured moment. Carmen laughed, and the sound came from everywhere at once, from the tent, from the trees, from the very air itself. Oh, but you are. You've been evidence for years. Detective, evidence of corruption, evidence of a broken system, evidence of what happens when someone who's supposed to serve truth decides to create it instead. She gestured to something behind me, and I turned to see my entire history displayed like a crime scene investigation board. Photos of every piece of evidence I'd ever planted, every report I'd falsified, every truth I'd bent to serve what I thought was justice. All of it documented, all of it preserved forever in this nightmare archive. The beast didn't create us, Carmen continued. We created the beast. Every photograph ever taken, every moment ever captured and frozen, feeds it, makes it stronger. And people like you, people who understand that evidence can be created as well as found, you're its favorite food. I saw the truth, then, horrible and complete. The beast wasn't some ancient evil that had awakened in the desert. It was something modern, something born from humanity's obsession with capturing and preserving moments. Every tourist photo, every crime scene documentation, every surveillance camera image, all of it feeding this collective entity that existed in the spaces between reality and representation. And I had been feeding it for years without knowing it. Every time I planted evidence, every time I created false documentation, I'd been strengthening the connection between what was real and what was recorded. I'd been teaching reality that it could be changed by photographs. Now you understand, said a familiar voice behind me. I turned to see myself, or rather the version of myself that belonged to the beast. He looked exactly like me, but his eyes glowed red and his smile was full of too many teeth. He was holding my old detective badge in one hand and my camera in the other. This is what you were always meant to become, he said. Not a servant of truth, but a creator of it. Not someone who finds evidence, but someone who makes it. Join us willingly, and your transition will be easier. And if I don't, the other me smiled wider, then we'll document your resistance. We'll photograph your fear, capture your pain, and preserve your terror forever. Either way, you're staying. The only choice is whether you fight it or embrace it. I looked around at the Martinez family, trapped in their eternal vacation moment. I thought about all the criminals I'd put away using planted evidence, guilty men who deserved to be in prison, but who were there because I'd broken the law to convict them. I thought about all the times I'd told myself that creating false evidence was acceptable if it served a greater truth. Maybe this was justice. Maybe this was where people like me belonged. Not in the real world where our corruption could hurt innocent people, but here in this space between reality and documentation, where we could create all the false evidence we wanted without affecting anyone else. The beast version of myself extended his hand. Come, detective, let's go document some truth. I reached out to take his hand, then I stopped, because I remembered something. A single moment from my years as a cop that I'd never documented, never photographed, never preserved in any way except in my own memory. The little girl, maybe Carmen's age, who'd hugged my leg after I'd found her teddy bear in the rubble of her destroyed home. She hadn't cared that I was a corrupt cop or that I'd planted evidence in other cases. All she'd cared about was that I'd helped her find something she'd lost. That moment had never been captured, never been documented, never been turned into evidence of anything except the fact that sometimes, rarely, I'd managed to do something good without an ulterior motive. And if I gave in now, if I joined the beast and became part of its collection of corrupted evidence, that moment would be lost forever. Not because it would be destroyed, but because there would be no one left to remember it who wasn't part of the nightmare. I pulled my hand back. No, I said. The beast version of myself snarled, showing teeth, like camera lenses. You cannot resist. This is what you are. This is what you've always been. Maybe, I admitted, but it's not what I have to stay. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd carried with me every day for 3 years. The photo of that little girl hugging my leg. The one piece of evidence I'd never been willing to falsify or use in any investigation. The one captured moment that was completely and purely true. The photograph felt warm in my hands, but not with the burning heat of the beast's hunger. This warmth was different, clean, real. The beast versions of myself and the Martinez family began backing away from me, their red eyes wide with something I'd never expected to see there. Fear. That doesn't belong here, Carmen said, her voice losing its supernatural echo and becoming just the frightened whisper of a lost child. That's not evidence. That's not documentation. That's just ... memory. I held the photo higher, and it began to glow with soft, natural light. It's truth, I said. Real truth. Not the kind I used to manufacture. Not the kind you feed on. The kind that exists whether anyone documents it or not. The photograph whirled around me began to dissolve at the edges, reality bleeding through, like developing solution on exposed film. The beast's collection of captured moments was losing its hold on this space, unable to maintain its false reality in the presence of something genuinely true. Destroy it, the beast me screamed, lunging forward. But I was already moving, holding the photograph like a shield, watching as its honest light burned away the lies that held this place together. I found myself back in the real desert, lying, on my side next to the pile of impossible photographs that had started everything. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood. My camera lay broken beside me, its lens cracked, its internal mechanisms fused into an unrecognizable mass of melted plastic and metal. But I was alive, more alive than I'd felt in years. The photographs were different now. Instead of showing the Martinez family trapped in their nightmare vacation, they showed the truth, a family whose car had broken down, who had walked into the desert looking for help, who had died of exposure before anyone could find them. Their bodies were 3 miles south, near an old mining claim, hidden in a shallow wash where the search teams hadn't thought to look. Tragic, but human, real, the kind of truth that didn't need to be manufactured or enhanced. I gathered up the photos and started walking south. The radio on my belt crackled to life as I moved. But now it was just normal Park Service chatter, search teams calling in negative results, helicopters reporting fuel levels, the ordinary business of people trying to save lives instead of document them. I found the Martinez family just before full dark. They were lying together in the shade of a large boulder, Miguel's arms around his wife and daughter, protecting them even in death. No claw marks, no supernatural tears in reality. Just 3 people who had made a bad decision in harsh country and paid for it with their lives. I documented the scene carefully, taking photos with an old backup camera I kept in my pack. Real photos this time. Evidence that would help their family understand what had happened, that would bring closure, instead of feeding nightmares. When the helicopter arrived to evacuate the bodies, I handed over all the photographs to the incident commander, both the real ones I'd just taken and the impossible ones that had started everything. Let someone else figure out what to make of them. Let someone else decide what was evidence and what was delusion brought on by too much heat and not enough water. I never told anyone about the beast, about the space between photographs where captured moments went to live forever. Who would believe me? And more importantly, who would benefit from believing me? Some truths are too dangerous to document, too terrible to preserve. But I kept that one photograph, the little girl hugging my leg. I carry it with me still, 3 months later, as I worked search and rescue in a different park, in a different state, far from the desert where I learned the difference between evidence and truth. Sometimes I catch glimpses of red eyes in the reflection of windows or the surface of still water. Sometimes I hear the sound of cameras clicking when I'm alone in the wilderness. The beast is still out there, still feeding on captured moments, still growing stronger with every photograph taken by every tourist, every investigator, every person who believes that reality can be improved by documentation. But it can't touch me anymore, because I carry something it can't understand, can't digest, can't add to its collection, a moment of pure truth, uncompromised by agenda or corruption or the need to prove anything to anyone. The irony isn't lost on me. After years of planting evidence to convict the guilty, I've finally learned that the most powerful evidence isn't something you create or find or photograph. It's something you remember. something you carry with you not because it serves any purpose, except to remind you that truth exists whether anyone documents it or not. I still take photographs in my work. Search and rescue requires documentation, but I'm careful now about what I capture and why. I think about every shot before I take it. I ask myself whether I'm documenting truth or creating evidence, whether I'm preserving reality or feeding something that shouldn't exist. Most importantly, I remember that some moments, the best moments, the truest moments, don't need to be captured at all. They just need to be lived, experienced, and carried forward in memory rather than silver and light. The little girl in my photograph is probably a teenager now. She's forgotten about the teddy bear, forgotten about the scary day when her house was destroyed, forgotten about the corrupt cop who helped her find something she'd lost. But I remember, and as long as I remember, that moment of simple human kindness remains true, even in a world where truth itself can be hunted by the things that live in our photographs. The beast is still out there, waiting in the spaces between camera shutters, feeding on our need to document and preserve and prove. But it can't have everything. Some truths are too pure to capture, too honest, too corrupt, too real to turn into evidence. I should know. I used to be in the business of manufacturing truth. Now I'm in the business of protecting it. The day I saw the Thunderbird, the sky was bleeding orange. That's what I wrote in my report later, though they made me change it to heavy smoke conditions with reduced visibility. But bleeding is what it was doing. The whole damn sky over Yellowstone looked like someone had cut it open and let it pour all over the mountains. My name is Lisa Morrison. I used to be Captain Morrison, but that was before I ran like a coward and left my boys to burn. I was standing on Dunraven Pass at 6 in the morning, watching the sunrise through smoke so thick you could chew it. The drought had been going on for 3 months. No rain, no snow, just dry wind and dead grass, and trees begging for a match. The Weather Service kept saying it was the worst fire season in 50 years. They were wrong. It was about to get a whole lot worse. I pulled my bandana up over my nose and breathed shallow. 8 years fighting fires in the Air Force teaches you how to work in smoke. Course. 8 years in the service also teaches you not to abandon your post when people need you most. Guess I only learned one of those lessons. The radio on my belt crackled. Morrison, you copy here, Chuck. I'm here. Weather Service just updated. Humidity's dropping to 8%. Winds picking up to 25, with gusts to 40. Red flag warnings in effect. I looked out at the forest, bone dry. Every tree, every bush, every blade of grass like kindling just waiting for a spark. Copy that. I'll start evacuation protocols for the backcountry sites. Already did. Last hikers should be out by noon. Chuck paused. Lisa, you okay out there? You sound tired. Tired? Yeah, that's what 8 months of nightmares will do to you. 8 months of hearing voices calling for help that you can't answer because you're not there. Because when it mattered most, you ran. I'm fine. I lied. Just the smoke. But I wasn't fine. Hadn't been fine since the night I left my squadron to burn while I saved my own skin. That's why I took this job. Fighting fires where the only person I could let down was myself. I was about to learn that wasn't how it worked. A sound made me look up. Something big was moving through the smoke above the tree line. My first thought was helicopter, but there was no engine noise. Just the whisper of wind over something massive. Probably a thermal current. I told myself. Hot air rising from the valley, making the smoke swirl funny. But my hands were already shaking as I reached for my binoculars. That's when I saw the first burn pattern. It was about 50 yards down the slope. A perfect circle of black earth, maybe 20 feet across. The weird thing wasn't that something had burnt. The weird thing was what hadn't. Inside the circle, untouched by fire, was a small pine tree, green as spring, not a needle singed. Around it, everything else was ash. The fire had burned right up to the tree trunk and stopped, like it was following orders. Fire doesn't work that way. Fire doesn't choose. I hiked down for a closer look, my boots crunching on burned needles. The ash was still warm. This had happened recently, maybe hours ago, but there'd been no lightning, no campers, no power lines, nothing that should have started a fire. I knelt and touched the ash. It felt different, grittier. I brought my fingers to my nose and smelled something that made my stomach drop. Jet fuel. The ash smelled like burning jet fuel and melted aluminum, and something else I tried not to think about. Something that smelled like the night I ran away from my duty. I stood up fast, wiping my hand on my pants. There were no jets here. No reason for the ash to smell like that. I was just stressed, imagining things. PTSD making me smell ghosts. But when I looked up, I saw more circles, dozens of them, stretching down the valley like black polka dots, on green fabric, each one perfectly round, each one with something living and untouched in the center. My radio squawked. All units, be advised. We're getting reports of unauthorized aircraft in the area. Possible military exercise. Anyone see anything unusual? I looked up at the sky. The smoke was getting thicker, but something was definitely moving up there. Something with wings spread wider than any bird I'd ever seen. Morrison here, I said into the radio. I've got some unusual burn patterns on the north slope of Dunraven. Might want to send someone to take a look. Copy that. You need backup. I should have said yes. Should have called for help, right? Then, and got the hell out of there. But I'd spent 8 months proving I could handle things alone. 8 months trying to forget what happens when you depend on other people. Negative. I'll check it out and report back. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was thinking the Thunderbird was just going to watch. The deeper I went into the valley, the wronger everything felt. It wasn't just the burn circles, though there were more of them now. It was the way the animals were acting. I'd been a ranger for 8 months, and I'd never seen anything like it. The elk were moving in single-file lines, heading straight for the main road. Not running scared, not grazing their way along. Walking with purpose, like they had somewhere important to be. A family of deer passed me going the opposite direction, and they didn't even look at me. Just kept walking with their heads up, listening to something I couldn't hear. Even the birds were wrong. The few that hadn't already left were flying in patterns that hurt to look at. Perfect spirals that made my eyes water if I watched too long. I followed the burn circles down toward Cascade Creek. The smell of jet fuel was getting stronger, mixed with something sweet and sick that reminded me of barbecued meat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept hearing things that weren't there. Radio chatter that sounded like my old squadron calling for backup. Engines that sounded like the B-52 that went down the night I ran. Voices calling my name in the smoke. I stopped at the creek to splash water on my face and get my head straight. The water was warm, too warm. Steam rose from it like soup in a pot. That's when I found the wreckage. It was half buried in the creek bed. Twisted metal that looked like airplane parts. Old airplane parts. The kind they don't make anymore. I waded in for a closer look, and my blood went cold. The tail number was visible through the mud and rust. 580201. I knew that number. I'd seen it painted on the side of a burning hangar 8 months ago, right before I turned and ran like a coward. But that was impossible. That plane had crashed in Nevada. I'd read the report. All crew lost, and it sure as hell hadn't crashed in Yellowstone in 1977. I backed away from the wreckage, my boots slipping on the wet rocks. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. I was having some kind of breakdown, seeing things that weren't there. That's when the thunder started, but there were no clouds. The sky was clear except for smoke, bright blue overhead where the haze thinned out. No storm system for 500 miles. But thunder was rolling across the valley like God was rearranging the furniture, and with each thunderclap, more fires started. I watched them bloom across the hillsides, not spreading from a central point like normal fires, just appearing, dozens of them, all at once, all in perfect circles. I grabbed my radio. Chuck, we have multiple fires starting simultaneously across the North Valley. I repeat, multiple fires of unknown origin. Static answered me. Then a voice that made my knees weak. Bravo 7, this is base operations. Where the hell are you? We've got wounded men in Hangar 3. That was Colonel Peterson's voice. The colonel who'd died when Hangar 3 collapsed. The colonel who'd been calling for help while I ran for the exit. Chuck, I tried again. Anyone copy? More static? Then, Morrison, why did you leave us? We needed you. I turned the radio off with shaking hands. The thunder was getting closer, louder, and with it came wind that shouldn't exist. Hot wind that smelled like sulfur and burning feathers. It whipped the smoke around until I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. That's when I heard the wings, not the flutter of a small bird or the whoomp-whoomp of a helicopter. This was the sound of something massive cutting through the air, something that could block out the sun. I looked up through the smoke and saw a shadow pass overhead, just for a second, but long enough to know it was huge, bigger than any plane, bigger than anything that should be able to fly, and it was following me. I started walking faster, then jogging, then running. The burn circles were appearing ahead of me now, like something was marking my path. The thunder was right behind me, getting closer with every step. I broke through the smoke at the edge of a meadow and stopped dead. There were people in the meadow, tourists, from the look of their clothes, a family with 2 kids, an elderly couple, a young man with a backpack. They were standing in a group, looking up at the sky with expressions of wonder and terror. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward them. "You need to get out of here. This area is being evacuated." The young man with the backpack turned toward me. His face was burned, melted, lips gone, one eye socket empty. When he opened his mouth to speak, smoke poured out. "We tried to run," he said in a voice like crackling fire, "but you can't outrun judgment." I stumbled backward. The whole group was turning toward me now, and they were all wrong, all burned, all dead. The little girl's hair was ash, floating around her head like a grey halo. The old man's fingers were charcoal sticks. "You left us to burn," the father said, holding his son's melted hand, "just like you left them." I turned and ran. Behind me, thunder crashed so close it shook the ground, and riding on that thunder, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. Laughter, deep and wild and hungry. The sound a predator makes when it's done playing with its food. I ran through smoke and burned trees and impossible fire circles, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. And all the while, that shadow followed overhead, patient as death. It wasn't until I reached the ranger station that I realized the truth. This wasn't just some weird fire behavior or stress hallucination. Something was hunting me. The ranger station was empty when I got there, which was wrong on about 50 different levels. Chuck should have been manning the radio. Sarah should have been updating the fire maps. Hell, even Smokey the Bear should have been there reminding people not to start forest fires. Instead, I found burned handprints on the door, not scorch marks from a fire. Handprints, like someone with hands made of red-hot coals, had grabbed the door handle and held on tight. The metal was melted around each finger. I pushed the door open anyway, because stupid decisions were apparently my specialty. The inside looked like a tornado had hit it. Maps torn off the walls, radio equipment smashed, chairs overturned, but no signs of struggle, no blood, just destruction, like the place had been searched by something with very big, very angry hands. I found Chuck's coffee mug on the floor, still warm, steam rising from the black coffee like incense. "Chuck," I called out. "Sarah, anyone here?" My voice echoed back from the empty rooms. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard typing. Someone was at a computer keyboard, pecking away at the keys, slow and deliberate, like they were hunting and pecking with one finger. I followed the sound to the back office. The computer was on, green text glowing on a black screen. Someone had typed a message. "Why did you run, Lisa?" The cursor blinked after my name like a heartbeat. I reached for the keyboard to delete it, and more words appeared. 8 men died because you chose yourself." My hands stopped halfway to the keys. I hadn't told anyone about that night. Not the whole truth. The official report said I was overcome by smoke and evacuated for medical reasons. Only I knew I'd had a clear path to Hangar 3. Only I knew I'd heard my boys calling for help and chose not to answer. More words appeared. They burned while you breathed fresh air. I backed away from the computer. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like laughter. Their screams followed you home. "Stop it," I whispered. "But you're home now, Lisa. Time to pay." The screen went black. Then, in the reflection of the dark monitor, I saw something that made me scream. A face, burned and twisted, with eyes like holes punched in paper. I spun around, but nothing was there. Just empty office space and the smell of smoke. I ran for the door and nearly knocked over Chuck. He was standing in the hallway, but something was wrong with him. His ranger uniform was smoking. Actual smoke, rising from the fabric like he was on fire from the inside. "Lisa," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through a furnace. "Why aren't you answering your radio?" I looked down. My radio was on my belt, right where it should be. But when Chuck spoke into his, the voice that came out of mine wasn't his. "Bravo 7, this is Airman Martinez. We're trapped in the hangar. Can anyone hear us? Please, we need help. Martinez, that was one of my boys, one of the 8 who died while I ran. Chuck, we need to get out of here, I said. Something's wrong with the radios. Something's wrong with everything. Chuck smiled, and smoke poured out between his teeth. Nothing's wrong, Lisa. Everything's exactly like it should be. Fire comes for everyone eventually. The only question is whether you face it or run. The walls around us started to smoke. Real smoke, like the building was burning from the inside out. But there were no flames, just heat and smoke and the sound of Chuck's radio crackling with voices of dead airmen. I pushed past him and ran for the exit. Behind me, I heard him laugh. Or maybe it was the thunder. It was getting hard to tell the difference. Outside, the world had gone insane. The sky was orange now, not from smoke but from fire. Actual fire, burning in the air like the atmosphere itself was fuel. And through that burning sky, something massive circled overhead. I got my first clear look at it as it banked over the station. It was a bird. Had to be a bird. But birds don't have 50-foot wingspans. Birds don't have eyes like soot. And birds definitely don't have feathers made of flame. The Thunderbird. It had to be. I'd heard the stories from the old-timers, the Lakota guides who sometimes helped with search and rescue. A giant bird that commanded storms and brought justice to those who betrayed their tribes. I'd always figured it was just legend. I was wrong about a lot of things. The bird circled lower, and I could see details that made my brain want to shut down. Each feather was a tongue of fire, rippling and dancing, but never burning away. Its beak was black metal, curved like a scythe, and its eyes, its eyes were full of faces. The faces of everyone who'd ever died because someone else ran away. It landed on the roof of the ranger station, with a sound like a building collapse. The whole structure groaned under its weight. Smoke began pouring from the windows. I ran for my truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Tried again. Nothing. The Thunderbird tilted its massive head and looked down at me with those terrible eyes. When it spoke, its voice was 8 voices. The voices of my squadron. You can't drive away this time, Captain. I grabbed my gear bag and ran into the forest. Behind me, the ranger station exploded into flames that reached 300 feet into the sky. The Thunderbird took off after me, its wings beating hurricane winds that fanned the fires into an inferno. Trees burst into flame as I passed them. The very air around me started to burn. But I kept running, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done when things get too hard, too scary, too real. Run, and let someone else burn. Only this time, the fire was following me. I made it as far as Old Faithful before my legs gave out. Not from exhaustion, though I was, running on pure terror and bad coffee. I collapsed because the ground under my feet was burning. Not the grass or the wooden walkways, the ground itself. The dirt and rocks glowed red hot, like the earth's core had pushed up through the surface. Steam rose from my boots as I stumbled toward the geyser basin. There were people there. Real people, not the burned ghosts I'd been seeing. Tourists who'd been cut off by the fires, huddled together near the geyser like it was some kind of sanctuary. Maybe 30 of them. Families with kids, elderly couples, a group of college students on spring break. They looked up when they saw me running toward them, hope flickering in their eyes. Thank God, a woman called out, "Are you here to evacuate us?" I wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. Instead, I pulled out my radio and tried one more time to reach anyone who might be able to help. Static. Then, clear as day, all units. This is base operations, be advised. Captain Morrison has abandoned her post. Consider her AWOL and unreliable. The tourists were staring at me, waiting for me to save them. Just like my squadron had waited that night 8 months ago. "Ma'am," the woman who'd spoken was holding a little girl, maybe 5 years old. "Is help coming?" Before I could answer, the sky exploded. The Thunderbird dropped out of the smoke like a meteor, wings spread so wide they blocked out the sun. When it hit the ground, the impact shook the entire geyser basin. Wooden walkways splintered, windows shattered in the visitor center. The tourists screamed and pressed closer together. The little girl started crying, and the Thunderbird spoke with the voice of Airman Martinez, the kid from Texas who'd called for help while his hangar burned around him. Judgment time. Captain, it stood maybe 50 feet away, head cocked like it was studying us, deciding who to burn first. Fire dripped from its feathers like rain, setting small blazes wherever it touched. You've got a choice, it said in Martinez's voice. Same choice you had before. Save them or save yourself. The heat was incredible. Even at that distance, I could feel my skin starting to blister. The tourists were backing toward the geyser, but there was nowhere to run. The Thunderbird had positioned itself between them and any escape route. What do you want? I shouted. What I wanted then, it said. And now it was using Corporal Henderson's voice. Henderson, who'd been caught under a beam, calling for someone to pull him out, for you to do your job. Fire erupted around us in a perfect circle, supernatural flames 20 feet high, trapping us in the geyser basin like animals in a pen. The heat was like standing next to a blast furnace. A college student tried to run through the firewall and came back screaming, his clothes burned off, skin blistered and bleeding. The little girl was crying harder now, her mother rocking her and whispering that everything would be okay. But everything was not going to be okay. Please, I said to the Thunderbird. They didn't do anything wrong. Let them go. Neither did we. Now, it was using Staff Sergeant Brooks's voice. Brooks, who'd tried to organize the evacuation, who'd stayed behind to make sure everyone got out. But you let us burn anyway. The firewall was closing in, inch by inch, step by step. The tourists pressed tighter around the geyser. Parents shielding their children, everyone looking at me like I was supposed to have answers. I understood then. This wasn't about revenge. It was about choice. The same choice I'd faced 8 months ago when I'd heard my boys calling for help through the smoke. I could save myself. There was just enough room between the Thunderbird and the firewall for one person to squeeze through. I could run, just like before. Let these people burn while I escaped to safety. Or I could do what I should have done that night in Nevada. Stay, fight, choose others over myself. The heat was getting worse. A man's jacket caught fire, and his wife was beating at the flames with her bare hands. The wooden walkway under our feet was starting to smoke. Time's up, Captain, the Thunderbird said in a voice that was all 8 of my dead airmen speaking together. Choose. I looked at the little girl crying in her mother's arms, looked at the scared faces turned toward me, trusting me to save them even though I'd already failed so many others. And I made my choice. I pulled the fire axe from my gear bag and stepped toward the Thunderbird. Get back, I yelled to the tourists. When I say run, you run for the parking lot. Don't look back. The Thunderbird tilted its massive head. You sure about this, Captain? Last time you ran, saved your own skin, let the heroes die. Yeah, well, I said, raising the axe. Last time I was a coward. The Thunderbird's eyes blazed brighter. It spread its wings and rose up on its hind legs, towering over me like a building made of fire and fury. Now, I screamed. The tourists ran. I heard their footsteps on the wooden walkway, heard parents calling to children, heard someone praying. In Spanish, the firewall parted just enough to let them through. Then the Thunderbird's beak came down like a spear, aimed right at my heart. I dove to the side, swinging my axe at the same time. The blade bit deep into its neck, and fire exploded outward like arterial spray. The creature screamed, not with human voices now, but with the sound of 1,000 storms breaking all at once. It whipped its head around, and one wing caught me across the chest. I flew 20 feet and hit the ground hard enough to crack ribs. The axe spun away into the darkness. The Thunderbird stalked toward me, fire dripping from the wound in its neck. But something was different now. The flames around us were flickering, unstable. Its eyes were dimmer. You can't win, it said, but the voices were fading. You can't change what you did. No, I gasped, struggling to my feet. But I can change what I do next. Old Faithful chose that moment to erupt. Superheated water and steam shot 300 feet into the air, right behind the Thunderbird. The creature spun toward the geyser, and I saw my chance. I ran straight at it, no weapon, no plan, just the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing means walking into the fire instead of away from it. The Thunderbird's claws raked across my back as I tackled it around the legs. We went down, together, rolling toward the geyser pool. Steam and scalding water filled the air. Together, I whispered as we fell. This time we burned together. The last thing I saw before we hit the water was the little girl looking back from the parking lot, safe with her mother, alive because someone finally chose not to run. Then everything went white. They found my body 3 days later. That's what the official report says. Anyway, Ranger Lisa Morrison, killed in the line of duty fighting the supernatural wildfire that destroyed 12,000 acres of Yellowstone before burning itself out. Course, the report doesn't mention the supernatural part, doesn't mention the Thunderbird, or the impossible fire circles, or the voices of dead airmen on the radio. Just says, I died heroically defending tourists from a rapidly spreading wildfire. The tourists backed up my story, mostly talked about a giant bird made of fire, about supernatural flames and impossible heat. But trauma does funny things to memory, and it's easier for people to believe they imagined the impossible parts. Easier for everyone to think it was just a bad fire and a brave ranger who died fighting it. But I know the truth. I'm still here, not alive. Exactly, not the way I was before, but here, bound to this place by choice instead of cowardice, tied to Old Faithful and the thermal features, watching over the tourists and hikers who come through. Most of the time, I'm invisible, just another part of the landscape, helping where I can. I guide lost hikers back to safety. I warn people away from dangerous areas. I make sure the thermal features work the way they're supposed to, keeping the underground fires in check. Sometimes though, when someone's in real danger, I can do more. Like last month, when those college kids got trapped by a wildfire near Mammoth Hot Springs, I appeared just long enough to show them the way out, looking solid and real as anyone. They probably thought I was just another ranger. That's fine by me. The Thunderbird's gone. Has been since that night at Old Faithful. When we fell into the geyser together, something changed. The creature of judgment became something else. Something that understood the difference between justice and mercy. Or maybe it just moved on, satisfied that I'd finally made the right choice. I like to think it was both. The families I saved that night send letters sometimes. The little girl draws pictures of Old Faithful and addresses them to the brave ranger lady. They get delivered to the visitor center, where the current staff files them away and wonders who she's writing to. Her name is Emma, by the way, Emma Rodriguez. She's 7 now, and she wants to be a park ranger when she grows up. Says she wants to help people like the lady who helped her. That makes me smile, even though smiling feels different now. Warmer, like a small fire that burns without consuming. There are worse ways to spend eternity than protecting the people you love in the place you love most. And there are worse things than being remembered as someone who finally learned to run toward the fire instead of away from it. Sometimes, late at night when the geyser basin is empty and quiet, I can still hear voices on the wind. But they're not calling for help anymore. They're saying thank you. And for the first time in 8 months, I can hear myself saying it back. The water burned my skin like acid. I pulled my hand back from the creek, watching the flesh turn red where the liquid had touched me. In 12 years of environmental testing, I'd never seen anything like this. The water wasn't just dirty, it was wrong. It moved too slow, caught the morning light in sick rainbow patterns, and stank like a hospital mixed with a graveyard. My name is Maria Santos, and I used to be the kind of scientist who lied for money. Now I'm a park ranger trying to fix what I helped break. Some days, I think God has a twisted sense of humor. Other days, like today, I think something much worse. Then God is keeping score. I pulled on fresh gloves and dipped my testing equipment into the poisoned creek. The numbers that came back made my stomach drop. pH levels that should have killed everything in a mile radius. Chemical signatures I recognized from the worst industrial disasters I'd ever covered up. The thing is, this was supposed to be pure Arkansas wilderness, Fouke County State Forest, where the only pollution should be from camping and hiking. But my instruments were screaming that this place was more toxic than a Superfund site. I'd been working this section for 3 days, documenting what the state called routine environmental assessment. Routine, my ass. Someone had called in reports of mass animal deaths, and the Park Service wanted to know why every living thing in a 10-square-mile area had suddenly decided to die. Looking around, I could see why. The cypress trees looked like they'd been painted with black tar. Their bark was peeling off in sheets, showing gray wood underneath that crumbled when you touched it. Spanish moss hung from the branches like dead hair, and everywhere I looked, the ground was littered with bones. Not normal bones either. These were twisted, bent into shapes that hurt to look at. I'd found deer skeletons with ribs that spiraled, like corkscrews, bird bones fused together into impossible tangles, and something that might have been an alligator. except alligators don't grow 3 extra legs. The silence was the worst part. In healthy swampland, you can't escape the noise. Frogs, birds, insects, water moving through the trees. Here, the only sound was my breathing through the gas mask and the soft plop of poisoned water dripping from dead branches. I checked my equipment again, hoping the readings were wrong. They weren't. The contamination levels were impossible. Whatever had been dumped here wasn't just industrial waste, it was the kind of stuff that gets locked away in military facilities. The kind of chemicals that don't exist in nature. The kind that rewrite the rules of biology just by existing. I knew, because I'd helped companies hide this exact type of contamination before. For 12 years, I'd worked for the EPA, and for 12 years, I'd taken money to write reports that said acceptable levels when I should have written evacuate immediately. I'd rubber-stamped death sentences for wetlands, rivers, and forests, because chemical companies paid better than government salaries. Every dollar I'd taken had bought something like this. Some piece of wilderness slowly dying in agony, while bureaucrats and executives pretended nothing was wrong. The guilt had finally broken me 3 years ago. I'd quit the EPA, taken a massive pay cut, and became a park ranger. I told myself I was going to protect places like this instead of selling them to the highest bidder. Now, I was standing in the middle of my worst nightmare, holding equipment that proved I'd failed before I'd even started. I sealed the water samples in containment tubes and marked them with coordinates. The state lab would probably take weeks to confirm what I already knew, but I had to follow protocol, even if protocol felt like a joke when you were standing in the middle of an environmental crime scene. A splash echoed across the water. I froze, listening. Something big had moved through the poisoned creek, but I couldn't see what. The chemical fog that rose from the water was too thick, and it played tricks with your eyes. Made shadows move when they should be still. Another splash, closer this time. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Santos. I'm seeing large animal movement in Sector 7. Requesting immediate backup for potential wounded wildlife. Static answered me. Then my supervisor's voice, crackling through interference. Santos, there's no large wildlife left in that sector. Everything bigger than a rat has been dead for weeks. I looked at the water where I'd heard the splashing. The surface was mirror still now, but I could swear something was watching me from underneath. Something that had learned to live in poison. That would kill anything else in minutes. Copy that. Base. Continuing assessment. I clipped the radio back to my belt and tried to shake off the feeling of being hunted. The toxins were probably affecting my judgment. Prolonged exposure to industrial chemicals could cause hallucinations, paranoia, audio distortions. But as I packed up my testing gear, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Handprints in the mud beside the creek, too big for human hands, with fingers that were too long and claws instead of nails. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was that they glowed. Soft green phosphorescence leaked from the impressions, like whatever had made them was full of the same chemicals that were killing everything else. Except, instead of dying, it had adapted, changed. Become something that could not only survive in this toxic wasteland, but maybe even feed on it. I took pictures with my field camera, but the prints were already fading as the chemical glow dissolved. Back into the poisoned mud, as I walked back toward my truck, I could feel eyes on my back. Something was following me through the dead trees, matching my pace, staying just out of sight. I told myself it was paranoia, chemical-induced anxiety, a normal stress response to environmental trauma. But when I reached my vehicle and looked back, I saw yellow eyes burning in the fog like headlights. They were 8 feet off the ground and filled with a hatred so pure it made my knees shake. I drove away fast, but not fast enough to miss the sound that followed me out of the forest. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It was the sound of something that had been changed by poison and pain into something completely new, something that remembered what had been done to its home. And something that knew exactly who was responsible. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes burning in the fog. I'd processed environmental disasters before, but this felt different, personal, like the poisoned forest was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was chemical exposure, toxic hallucinations. The smart thing would be to report the contamination levels and let someone else handle the cleanup. But when I opened my field kit, I found something that changed everything. The water samples I'd sealed yesterday weren't just contaminated anymore. They were glowing. Soft green light pulsed from inside the containment tubes like a radioactive heartbeat. I ran every test I could think of. The chemical signatures came back impossible. Compounds that shouldn't exist. Molecular structures that broke the laws of chemistry. And underneath it all, something that looked almost like DNA, but twisted into patterns that hurt to look at. I had to go back. The forest felt different in the morning light, more hostile. The chemical fog was thicker, hanging between the trees like poisonous spiderwebs. My gas mask was barely keeping the worst of it out, and I could taste metal on my tongue despite the filters. I followed the creek deeper into the contamination zone, documenting everything. Dead fish floating in crystalline formations. Plant life that had grown into impossible geometries before dying. And everywhere, those glowing handprints in the mud. They were leading somewhere. The prints formed a trail that wound through the worst of the toxic zone, past tree trunks that had been clawed open and rock formations that had been arranged into patterns. Someone or something was claiming territory here. The trail ended at a clearing where industrial drums were half buried in the mud, 55-gallon containers, corroded and leaking, arranged in a perfect circle around a natural depression that had filled with the most poisonous water I'd ever seen. The liquid moved on its own, forming spirals and eddies without any wind. To drive them, I recognized the drum markings immediately. Petrolux Chemical Corporation, the same company that had paid me to falsify contamination reports for 6 different sites across 3 states. My hands started shaking as I took pictures. This wasn't an accident. Someone had transported industrial waste to the middle of a national forest and dumped it in a specific pattern. The kind of pattern that suggested ritual rather than convenience. The water in the depression glowed brighter as I got closer, and I started to hear something underneath the sound of my own breathing. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once, in whispers I could barely make out. They sounded like animals' growls and barks, and howls, but formed into words I almost understood. BETRAYER ... POISONER ... killer. I jerked back from the edge of the toxic pool and nearly fell into one of the drums. The voices stopped, but the feeling of being watched got stronger. Something was moving in the forest around me. I could hear branches breaking and water splashing as whatever it was circled the clearing. It was big enough to shake the ground when it walked, but smart enough to stay hidden behind the fog and the dying trees. My radio crackled to life. Santos, what's your status? You've been dark for 2 hours. I grabbed the handset, grateful for human contact. Base, I've found the contamination source. Industrial dumping on a massive scale. I need hazmat teams and federal investigators out here immediately. Copy that. What's the threat level? I looked at the glowing drums, the poisoned water, the claw marks on the trees. Environmental catastrophe. Whatever they dumped here is ... A roar cut through the fog like a chainsaw through paper. It was the sound of every animal that had ever been tortured, magnified and twisted until it could shatter windows. The cry of something that had been changed by poison and wanted the world to know what had been done to it. I ran. Behind me, water exploded as something massive emerged from the toxic pool. I could hear it crashing through the forest, following me, getting closer with every step. Whatever it was moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. I reached my truck and gunned the engine before I'd even closed the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of what was chasing me, 8 feet tall and covered in scales that glowed with chemical fire. Arms like tree trunks ending in claws that could tear steel. A face that might have been human once, before the poison had rewritten its DNA into something from a nightmare. And eyes that burned with intelligent hatred. It stopped at the edge of the forest and watched me drive away. It knew where I was going. It knew I'd be back. Because we weren't finished with each other yet. The lab results came back 3 days later, and they were worse than I'd thought possible. The contamination wasn't just toxic, it was alive. The compounds I'd found were reproducing, evolving, creating new forms of poison that scientists didn't have names for. Whatever Petrolux had dumped in that forest was turning into something that could spread beyond the containment zone. The federal investigation team arrived that afternoon. 3 EPA scientists in hazmat suits who looked exactly like I used to, clean, professional, ready to minimize whatever they found to protect corporate interests. I recognized the lead investigator immediately, Dr. Richard Vance, the man who'd trained me to write acceptable levels instead of toxic disaster in my reports. He'd made senior executives since I'd left the agency, and his handshake felt like shaking hands with my past. "Maria," he said, setting up his equipment in my ranger station, "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you out here. Last I heard, you'd left environmental science entirely." "I'm still in the science," I said, "just not in the lying part anymore." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you haven't let personal feelings cloud your assessment. Petrolux is a major EPA partner, and premature allegations could hurt important ongoing projects." There it was, the same speech I'd given to whistleblowers when I was on the other side. The gentle reminder that corporate relationships mattered more than environmental truth. "The contamination levels speak for themselves," I said, handing him my test results. "This site needs immediate evacuation and full remediation." He glanced at the numbers and frowned. "These readings can't be accurate. Our preliminary tests show elevated but manageable contamination. Nothing that requires emergency response." I knew what was happening. Vance had been sent to contain the situation, not investigate it. His job was to write a report that said, "Minor industrial accident, cleanup in progress, no threat to public safety." My job, whether I liked it or not, was to make sure that didn't happen. "Then you need to test the water in the drum circle," I said. "About 2 miles northeast of here. That's where the real contamination is." "I'll make a note of it," he said, but I could tell he had no intention of going anywhere near the toxic dump site. That night, I went back to the forest alone. I had to. Vance's team would file their report, Petrolux would pay a small fine, and the contamination would be declared contained while it spread through the groundwater into populated areas. In 5 years, kids in Little Rock would be getting cancer, and no one would connect it to chemicals dumped in a forest they'd never heard of. I couldn't let that happen. Not again. The toxic fog was thicker now, and it moved with purpose. Tendrils of glowing vapor followed me through the trees like searching fingers. The forest was waking up, becoming aware of my presence. When I reached the drum circle, I wasn't alone. It was waiting for me in the center of the clearing, standing waist-deep in the glowing pool like some kind of radioactive god. 8 feet of muscle and scales and barely contained fury, watching me with eyes that burned like chemical fires. When it spoke, its voice was every animal that had died in this forest. "You came back," it said. "Good. We need to talk." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was impossible, but the guilty part recognized exactly what I was looking at. "You know what this is," the creature said, gesturing at the toxic wasteland around us. Asterisk, "You helped make it. 12 years of lies. 12 years of trading death for money." Asterisk, "I didn't know about this site," I whispered. Asterisk, "But you knew about others. Rivers, wetlands, drinking water, supplies. How many children have cancer because of reports you falsified?" Asterisk, I couldn't answer. The number was too high, and I'd spent 3 years trying not to think about it. "I am what this place became," the creature continued. Asterisk, "What your lies created. Poison made flesh. Contamination given consciousness. And I remember every death you enabled. Asterisk, it stepped closer, and I could see the chemical burns that covered its body. Scars from transformations that should have been impossible. Evidence of pain that had been transmuted into rage. But you're here now," it said. Asterisk, "Trying to fix what you broke. Why?" Asterisk, "Because I was wrong," I said. "Because I killed things that didn't deserve to die. Because I have to try to make it right." The creature studied me for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was almost gentle. Asterisk, "The others will try to bury this. Your old colleagues. They'll write reports that make the poison disappear on paper while it spreads through the water table." Asterisk, "I won't let them." "No," it agreed. Asterisk, "You won't. Because you're going to help me make sure the truth comes out. All of it. Every chemical. Every cover-up. Every death." Asterisk, "How?" It smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. Asterisk, "By becoming what I am. By choosing the forest over the corporation. By letting the poison into your blood, so you can never lie about it again." Asterisk, I understood what it was offering. Transformation, mutation, the chance to become living proof of what industrial contamination could do to human beings. "Will it hurt?" I asked. "Everything hurts," it said. "But pain with purpose is better than comfort built on lies." I looked around at the dying forest, at the evidence of corporate crimes I'd helped cover up, at the creature that had been born from poison and rage. Then I stepped into the glowing pool. The water felt like liquid fire. It burned through my protective gear like it wasn't there, seeping into my skin, my bloodstream, my bones. I screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't entirely human anymore. The creature watched me change with something that might have been compassion. "It's easier if you don't fight it," it said. Asterisk, let the chemicals rewrite you. Let them show you what you really are. Asterisk, I tried to climb out of the pool, but my legs wouldn't work. The transformation was happening too fast. I could feel my DNA unraveling and rebuilding itself into something new. Something that could survive in poison that would kill normal humans in seconds. Through the chemical haze, I saw headlights cutting through the fog. Vance's EPA team had followed me into the forest. 3 men in hazmat suits, carrying equipment designed to contain environmental disasters. They stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared at what I was becoming. "Jesus Christ," one of them whispered. "What happened to her?" "Chemical exposure," Vance said. But his voice was wrong. Too calm, like he'd expected this. "Massive contamination event. We'll need to contain the area immediately." I tried to speak, to warn them about what was really happening, but my throat was changing too fast. The words came out as growls and howls that only the creature seemed to understand. "They're not here to help," it told me. Asterisk, they're here to clean up the evidence, including you. Asterisk, Vance was giving orders to his team. Containment protocols, sterilization procedures, the kind of cleanup that made inconvenient evidence disappear forever. "Choose," the creature said. Asterisk, let them bury the truth with your body, or help me make sure the world knows what was done here. Asterisk, the transformation was accelerating. I could feel my nervous system rewiring itself, my senses expanding beyond human limits. The chemical signatures of every poison in the forest became as clear as road signs. I could smell the fierce sweat of the EPA team through their protective suits. I could hear their radios crackling with orders to contain and sanitize. I made my choice. The creature and I erupted from the toxic pool together, moving faster than the EPA team could react. They scattered, dropping their equipment, running for their vehicles like the professionals they were trained to be. But we were faster now, stronger, built for survival in environments that would kill normal humans. Vance tried to reach his radio. I caught him before he could call for backup, my new claws wrapping round his throat. "Richard," I said, surprised that I could still speak. "Remember what you taught me about manageable contamination levels." His eyes went wide behind his mask. "Maria, please, we can fix this. We can cover for you." "I don't want to be covered for anymore," I said. "I want the truth to come out." "Show him," the creature said. "Show him what his lies create." I pressed my hand against Vance's hazmat suit, letting the chemicals in my bloodstream eat through the protective fabric. He screamed as the poison touched his skin, but I didn't let go. "Feel it," I whispered. "Feel what you've been covering up for 20 years. The contamination spread through his system like wildfire. His DNA started rewriting itself, his body adapting to toxins that shouldn't exist. In minutes, he would become what we were, living proof of corporate environmental crimes. Now, he can never lie about contamination again," the creature said. "Because he is contamination." The other EPA scientists were trying to reach their vehicles, but the forest itself was hunting them now. Poisonous fog that moved with purpose, tree branches that reached like grasping fingers, ground that opened into toxic sinkholes wherever they stepped. "Let them go," I said. Asterisk, they'll tell people what they saw here. They'll have to. Asterisk, the creature considered this, then nodded. Asterisk, fear spreads faster than truth. Let them carry both. Asterisk, we watched the survivors drive away, carrying news of what the forest had become, carrying proof that environmental disasters could fight back. Asterisk, what happens now? Asterisk, I asked. Now we wait, the creature said. Asterisk, for the scientists, the reporters, the investigators who won't be bought off. And when they come, we show them everything. Every chemical, every cover-up, every death. Asterisk, I looked down at my transformed hands. They glowed with the same phosphorescence as the contaminated water, marking me forever as part of this poisoned place. You were a scientist once, the creature said. Asterisk, now you can be something better. Living evidence, proof that cannot be falsified or buried. Asterisk, around us, the toxic forest pulsed with new life. Not healthy life, but life that had learned to thrive in poison. Life that remembered what had been done to it. and life that would make sure the world never forgot. 6 months later, the Fuchs Forest contamination became the biggest environmental scandal in Arkansas's history. The survivors from Vance's EPA team couldn't stop talking. They told everyone who would listen about the creatures living in the toxic wasteland, about government scientists who had been transformed by their own cover-ups, about a forest that hunted corporate executives. Most people thought they were crazy, but enough believed them to demand investigations. Real investigations, conducted by scientists who couldn't be bought off. Environmental groups that had been fighting corporate contamination for decades. Reporters who understood that the biggest stories were always the ones someone didn't want told. I watched it all from the forest, monitoring radio transmissions and internet news feeds with equipment I'd salvaged from abandoned research stations. My transformed nervous system could process electromagnetic signals directly now, making me a living antenna for information about the outside world. The truth came out piece by piece. Petrolux's illegal dumping operations, falsified EPA reports going back 20 years, children in 3 states who had developed rare cancers from contaminated groundwater. My name was mentioned in every report. Dr. Maria Santos, the EPA scientist who had blown the whistle on environmental cover-ups by becoming living proof of their consequences. Some called me a hero, others called me a monster. I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Vance survived his transformation, but it left him unable to lie about contamination levels. Every time he tried to downplay environmental damage, his body would start glowing, betraying the truth his mouth wouldn't tell. He'd become a living detector for corporate environmental crimes. The creature I'd learned his name was Marcus, a park ranger who'd been contaminated during the original dumping, helped me understand what we'd become. We weren't just mutants, we were witnesses, living testimony that couldn't be silenced or discredited. The forest chose us, he told me during one of our late-night conversations. Asterisk, not to punish the guilty, but to protect the innocent, to make sure this never happens again. Asterisk, other contaminated sites started reporting similar guardians. Toxic rivers, where something intelligent moved through the poison. Chemical waste dumps where corporate executives disappeared, and environmental activists found evidence of cover-ups scattered across their desks the next morning. We weren't alone anymore. The contamination was spreading, but so was the resistance. I still tested water samples, still documented chemical signatures and contamination levels, but now my reports went directly to environmental groups and independent scientists. No corporate filters, no government editing, just truth, delivered by someone who had literally become part of the story. The forest was healing, slowly, not back to what it had been, that was impossible, but into something new, something that could survive in a world where corporations routinely poisoned the environment for profit. Children from nearby towns started coming to the edge of the contamination zone, drawn by stories of the monsters who protected nature from corporate greed. I stayed hidden during these visits, but I could hear them talking to Marcus through the fog. Asterisk, is it true you eat pollution? Asterisk, a young girl asked during one visit. I am pollution, Marcus replied gently. Asterisk, but I'm also alive. And being alive means fighting for life. Are you going to hurt people? Only people who hurt the forest, and only as much as they deserve. Asterisk, the girl considered this. Asterisk, my dad works for the chemical plant. He says you're dangerous. Your dad is probably right. Asterisk, Marcus said. Asterisk, but dangerous to whom? Dangerous to companies that dump poison in rivers. Dangerous to scientists who lie about contamination. Or dangerous to little girls who want clean water to drink. The last one. Asterisk, she said after a moment. Asterisk, then your dad has nothing to worry about. Asterisk, later, after the children had gone home, I asked Marcus if he ever regretted what we'd become. Every day, he said. Asterisk, but not because of what we are, because of what made us necessary. Asterisk, I understood. We were the price of environmental crime, the cost of choosing corporate profits over ecological health, living reminders that nature always finds a way to collect what it's owed. The contamination zone had become a place of pilgrimage for environmental activists. They came to see proof that the earth could fight back, that somewhere in the world, corporate executives woke up at night, knowing that their crimes had consequences. Some nights, I dreamed of my old life. Clean laboratories, government paychecks, the comfortable certainty that someone else would handle the consequences of my lies. Then I would wake up in the glowing forest, surrounded by water that burned, and trees that remembered every death, and I would know I was exactly where I belonged. The transformation was permanent, irreversible, but it had given me something worth more than human DNA, the absolute certainty that I would never lie about environmental damage again, because I had become environmental damage, and I would make sure the world never forgot what that looked like. In the distance, another splash echoed across the toxic water. Another guardian was being born, somewhere in the poisoned wilderness where corporate greed met natural consequences. The forest was growing, spreading, teaching the world that some prices must be paid in full, and we were the collectors. The radio crackled like broken bones in the pre-dawn darkness. Ranger Station 7. This is Marcus. I'm heading out to Whisper Caverns. Family of 4 went missing yesterday. I checked my watch for 17 a.m. Snow hammered the windshield so hard I could barely see the road. My name is Marcus Delgado. I've been a search and rescue ranger for 8 years now, ever since I got back from Vietnam. Some folks think I'm crazy for choosing this job after what I went through over there. Crawling through those tunnels, hunting. Charlie, in the dark, it left me with a fear of tight spaces that still makes my hands shake. But saving people feels better than killing them. That's something I learned the hard way. The storm was getting worse. Weather reports said it was the biggest one to hit Olympic National Forest in 50 years. Perfect time for a family to get lost in the caves. I turned up my radio and heard Sophia's voice from the recording I keep. Come home safe, Papa. My little girl made that for me last Christmas. She's only 6, but she already worries about her old man heading into the woods. The Douglas fir trees stood like giant soldiers in the snow, their branches heavy and drooping. Everything looked different in this storm. Familiar trails disappeared under white blankets, and the whole forest felt like it was holding its breath. My truck's headlights cut through the falling snow, but not very far. I had to drive slow, real slow. The road to Whisper Caverns winds through some rough country, and one wrong turn means a long drop down a rocky slope. That's when I saw the deer. A whole family of them came crashing through the trees, running like something was chasing them, but they weren't running from me, they were running from something deeper in the forest, something that made them panic so bad they'd rather face my truck than go back where they came from. I stopped and rolled down my window. The silence hit me like a slap. No wind, no falling snow sounds, nothing. Even the snowflakes seemed to hang in the air like they were frozen in time. My radio buzzed with static, then went quiet. Too quiet. I've been in these woods thousands of times. I know every trail, every cave, every hiding spot where kids get lost or hunters wait out storms. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the forest felt like it was watching me. The scar on my left temple started throbbing. It always does that when a storm's coming, but this was worse than usual, like my head was trying to warn me about something besides the weather. I reached for the compass my dad gave me before he died. It always pointed north, always helped me find my way home. But when I looked at it now, the needle was spinning, like a crazy thing, unable to decide which way to point. That should have been my first warning to turn round and head back to town. But the Henderson family was out there somewhere. Mom, Dad, and 2 kids, ages 8 and 10. They'd been camping when the storm hit, and their last radio call came from somewhere near the caves. I put the truck in gear and kept driving toward Whisper Caverns. Behind me, something howled in the distance. It didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard. The snow kept falling, but now it felt like it was falling up instead of down. I found their campsite just as the sun should have been coming up, but the storm clouds made everything stay dark as midnight. The Henderson family's gear was scattered everywhere like a bomb had gone off. Their tent was ripped to pieces, not cut or torn, but shredded like something with claws the size of kitchen knives had gone to work on it. Sleeping bags hung from tree branches 20 feet up. A cooler sat upside down with its contents frozen solid in the snow, but no blood, no bodies, no sign of what happened to them. I called out, "Hello, Henderson family, this is Ranger Delgado." My voice echoed off the cave entrance, but nobody answered back. That's when I saw the tracks. I've tracked everything that lives in these woods: bears, mountain lions, elk, you name it. But these prints were something else entirely. 18 inches long, shaped like human feet, but twice as wide, with claw marks that dug deep into the frozen ground. They led straight to the mouth of Whisper Caverns. The cave entrance yawned like a hungry mouth in the rock face. I'd been inside those caves dozens of times. They go back for miles, with tunnels that connect to other cave systems throughout. The mountains, easy place to get lost. Easy place to die if you don't know what you're doing. My radio crackled to life. Marcus, you copy? This is Marcus. I'm at the campsite. Find anything. Campsite's destroyed. Following tracks into the cave's static filled the radio for a long moment. Then I heard something that made my blood turn cold. It was my own voice coming through the speaker. Help me. I'm trapped. The caves are collapsing. But I was standing right there, holding the radio. I wasn't trapped anywhere. Bass, did you copy that transmission? Copy what? Marcus, you just asked about the weather report. I stared at the radio. Either I was losing my mind, or something very wrong was happening here. The smell hit me next, wet fur, mixed with something rotten, like meat left in the sun too long. It was coming from inside the cave, getting stronger every second. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my rope and emergency flares, and started into the cave. The passage was wide at first, easy to walk through. My boots echoed off the rock walls, and my flashlight beam danced across ancient formations that looked like frozen waterfalls. But with each step deeper, the passage got narrower. My chest started getting tight, that old familiar feeling from the tunnels in Vietnam. The rock walls seemed to be pressing in on me, even though I knew they weren't moving. Breathe, Marcus, I told myself. Just breathe and do your job. That's when I heard the voices. They were coming from somewhere deep in the cave system, too far away to make out words, but close enough to know they were human. Children's voices. The Henderson kids. I moved faster, following my flashlight beam and the sound of their cries. The tunnel twisted and turned, going deeper into the mountain. Sometimes it opened up into big chambers. Sometimes it squeezed down so tight I had to duck my head and fight the panic that wanted to grab hold of me. The voices got clearer as I went deeper. A little girl crying. A boy calling for his mom and dad. They sounded scared and cold and lost. I'm coming, I shouted. Stay where you are. Help is coming. But when my voice echoed back to me, it didn't sound right. It sounded like someone else was saying the words. Someone with a voice deeper and rougher than mine. My flashlight beam swept across the cave walls, and that's when I saw them scratch marks. Not little scratches like a lost hiker might make, but deep gouges in solid rock. Whatever made them had claws like steel and the strength to cut stone like butter. The scratches were too high up for any normal animal. They started about 8 feet off the ground and went up another 4 feet. Whatever made them was huge. That's when my radio came to life again. But this time the voice speaking was different. It was speaking Vietnamese, the same dialect I'd heard in the tunnels during the war. The voice was asking for help, begging someone to come save them. But that was impossible. Those tunnels were on the other side of the world, and most of the people I'd heard down there were dead now. I tried to shake it off and keep moving toward the children's voices, but my hands were shaking and my breathing was getting fast and shallow. The cave walls felt like they were closing in, and suddenly I wasn't in Olympic National Forest anymore. I was back in Siu Chi, crawling through a tunnel barely wide enough for my shoulders, listening to enemy voices in the dark, knowing that around any corner there might be a booby trap or a man with a knife waiting to kill me. No, I said out loud, that's not where you are. You're in Washington State, you're saving a family. But when I looked up, the cave ceiling seemed to be getting lower, and the walls were dirt instead of rock, held up by wooden supports that looked exactly like the tunnel systems I'd crawled through in 1970. The children's voices were getting closer, but now they sounded different too. Instead of English, they were speaking Vietnamese. Instead of calling for their parents, they were calling for me. Marcus, they whispered. Marcus, help us. We're trapped down here in the dark. I knew those voices. They belonged to children I'd found in the tunnels during the war. Children who didn't make it out alive. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 red lights glowing in the darkness ahead, watching me from a place where the tunnel split into 3 different directions. They were too high up to belong to the missing kids, and they didn't blink or move like human eyes. They just stared, patient and hungry. I raised my flashlight, and for just a second, I saw something impossible. A massive shape, covered in dark fur, with shoulders broader than a doorway. But when my light hit it full on, it faded away like smoke, leaving nothing but empty cave and the echo of something very large moving through solid rock. My radio burst to life one more time. Ranger Delgado, we've lost contact with you. What's your status? I tried to answer, but my throat wouldn't work because the voice on the radio belonged to me, and I was asking for help from somewhere very far away. I chose the middle tunnel and kept going deeper, following the children's voices, even though every instinct told me to turn around and run. The Henderson kids were down here somewhere, and they were counting on me to bring them home. The tunnel started getting narrow again, so narrow I had to turn sideways to squeeze through some parts. My chest felt like someone was sitting on it, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight steady. But then I heard them clearly, a little girl crying and a boy trying to comfort her. Real voices, speaking English, not the ghost voices that had been haunting me since I had entered the caves. We're okay, Emma, the boy was saying. Dad's going to find us. He promised. I'm scared, Tyler. It's so dark, and something's watching us. These were the Henderson kids. I was sure of it. Tyler, Emma, I called out. This is Ranger Marcus. I'm here to take you home. Help, Tyler shouted back. We're in here. We can't find the way out. I followed their voices through a passage that opened up into a big underground chamber. My flashlight beam swept across limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls and columns that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. In the far corner of the chamber, I saw them two kids, huddled together under a survival blanket, their parents unconscious beside them. The whole family was alive, but they looked like they'd been through hell. Their clothes were torn, and they had scratches on their arms and faces. Thank God, I whispered, and started across the chamber toward them. That's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, like when a cloud covers the sun, but all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door the size of a house. My breath came out in white puffs, and the moisture in the air started turning to ice crystals that sparkled in my flashlight beam. The kids saw me coming and tried to stand up, but they were too weak and scared to move very far. Tyler, the older boy, kept looking over my shoulder like he expected something to follow me into the chamber. How long have you been down here? I asked, kneeling beside them and checking their parents' pulse. Weak but steady. Since yesterday, Tyler said. We were exploring the caves when the storm started. Dad said we should wait it out down here. But then, double quotes, he trailed off and looked at his sister. Then what? Something came after us, Emma whispered. Something big and hairy that smelled like dead animals. It chased us deeper into the caves. It wasn't a bear, Tyler added quickly. Bears don't walk on two legs, and they don't disappear through solid rock. I was checking Mrs. Henderson's breathing when the scratching started. It came from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath us. Like something with enormous claws was trying to dig its way into the chamber from all directions. The sound echoed and bounced around the limestone formations until it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. Tyler grabbed his sister and pulled her closer to their parents. It's back, he whispered. It found us again. My radio crackled. Marcus, what's your position? We're losing your signal. But when I tried to respond, my own voice came through the speaker again. The caves are changing. The tunnels don't go where they used to go. Something's down here with us, and it's not natural. Base, I didn't send that transmission, I said into the radio. Send what transmission, Marcus? We haven't heard from you in 20 minutes. The scratching got louder, and chunks of limestone started falling from the ceiling. But it wasn't random. The falling rocks formed a perfect circle around us, like something was drawing a target with us in the bull's eye. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It came through the wall like the rock was made of water, materializing slowly until it stood at full height in the chamber with us, 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in hands tipped with claws like black daggers. But it was the eyes that got me, intelligent red eyes that looked at me, like they knew exactly who I was and what I'd done in those tunnels in Vietnam. The creature's mouth opened, and it spoke in the voice of Sergeant Williams, my squad leader who died in a tunnel collapse in Siu Chi. Hello, Marcus. Been a long time. Emma started crying, but it wasn't the normal crying of a scared little girl. It was the sobbing of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't take any more. Tyler just stared at the creature with his mouth hanging open. You're not real, I said, raising my rifle. Williams is dead. I saw him die. Oh, I'm real, the creature said, still using Williams's voice. Real as those tunnels you left us in. real as the promises you made to come back for us. I fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed right through the creature, like it was made of smoke, hitting the cave wall behind it and sending rock chips flying everywhere. The creature laughed with Williams's laugh, then shifted and spoke in the voice of a Vietnamese child I'd found dying in a tunnel. You left us all down there in the dark, didn't you, Marcus? Just like you're going to leave this family. No, I said, grabbing Tyler's arm and pulling him toward his parents. We're all getting out of here now. But when I looked back at the passage I'd come through, it wasn't there anymore. The chamber had only one exit now, a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the mountain. The creature had somehow changed the cave system, rearranging it like pieces on a chessboard. The way out is through, the creature said, and this time its voice was my own. You know that better than anyone, tunnel rat. It started walking toward us, its massive feet leaving deep prints in the stone floor. With each step, the chamber got smaller, the walls pressing in from all sides. Soon we'd be trapped in a space barely big enough for all of us. Mrs. Henderson started waking up, groaning and trying to sit up. When she saw the creature, she screamed a sound that bounced off the walls and seemed to go on forever. Run, I told the family. Take that tunnel and run. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. What about you? Tyler asked. I'll be right behind you, I lied, because I could already see what was going to happen. The creature wasn't going to let us all leave. It wanted me to choose, save myself or save the family, and I'd already made that choice once before, in a tunnel on the other side of the world. This time, I was going to make the right one. The Henderson family ran for the tunnel while I stood between them and the creature, my rifle ready, even though I knew bullets wouldn't stop it. The thing that looked like Bigfoot but moved like a nightmare watched them go with those burning red eyes, then turned its attention back to me. You can't save them all, Marcus, it said in my dead squad leader's voice. You never could. The chamber kept shrinking, the limestone walls closing in like the jaws of some ancient trap. Soon the space would be too small to stand up in, too narrow to turn around. Just like those tunnels in Siu Chi, where good men died because I couldn't get to them in time. This isn't about Vietnam, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is about a family that needs to get home. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with distant thunder. Everything's about Vietnam with you, tunnel rat. Every cave, every dark place, every time you have to choose between saving yourself and saving someone else. It was right, and I hated that it was right. Every time I went into a cave or a tight space, I was back in those tunnels, listening to my buddies die while I crawled through the dark looking for a way out that didn't exist. That's why you're here, the creature continued. That's why you picked this job. You keep trying to save people to make up for the ones you left behind. I didn't leave them behind, I shouted, but my voice cracked as I said it. The tunnel collapsed. There was nothing I could do. There's always something you could do. You could have stayed with them. You could have died with them like a good soldier instead of crawling away to save your own skin. The walls were so close now I could touch both sides with my outstretched arms. In a few more minutes, the space would be too small for anything, except lying flat on the ground. I could hear the Henderson family moving through the tunnel, getting farther away, but not fast enough. That's when I realized what the creature really was. It wasn't Bigfoot. It wasn't some forest monster that had wandered down from the mountains. It was guilt made flesh, trauma given teeth and claws. It was every mistake I'd ever made, every person I'd failed to save. Every night I'd woken up screaming from dreams about dark tunnels and distant voices calling for help. You're me, I said. You're the part of me that never left those tunnels. The creature's form shifted and changed, and for a moment I was looking at myself, but a version of me that had died in Vietnam, that had stayed in the tunnels with my squad instead of crawling toward the light. Its face was my face, but older and angrier and full of blame. I'm what you made me, it said in my own voice. Every time you go into a cave, every time you try to save someone, you make me stronger, because you know you can't save them all. You know you're going to fail, just like you failed in Siu Chi. The chamber was getting so small I had to crouch down. Soon I'd be on my hands and knees, crawling through the dark just like before. The familiar panic started rising in my chest, that crushing feeling of being buried alive in rock and earth. But then I heard something that changed everything. Sophia's voice from my radio. That recording she'd made for me. Come home safe, Papa. Not the voices of dead soldiers. Not the guilt and fear that had been eating at me for 8 years. Just my little girl asking me to come home. I pulled out my emergency charges, the small explosives every ranger carries for clearing rock slides. If I could collapse the right parts of the chamber, I might be able to trap the creature and give the family time to escape. "You can't blow this place up," the creature said, reading my thoughts. "You'll be trapped down here forever." "Maybe," I said, setting the charges along the chamber's weakest points, "but they'll be safe. Your daughter will grow up without a father. She'll grow up alive." The creature rushed at me, its massive claws reaching for my throat, but I was already moving. All those months crawling through tunnels had taught me how to move fast in tight spaces. I rolled under its grab and triggered the first charge. The explosion shook the whole chamber, and chunks of limestone rained down from the ceiling. A crack appeared in the wall where the creature had first entered, and I could see something impossible through it, not more cave, but a jungle night filled with the sound of distant artillery. The creature was pulling me back into my memories, trying to trap me in the past. "No more," I said, and triggered the second charge. This explosion was bigger, and the crack in the wall spread like a spider web. The creature screamed not with any human voice now, but with a sound like wind through broken trees. It was losing its hold on this place, and on me. I triggered the third charge, and the chamber started collapsing in earnest. Huge blocks of stone fell from the ceiling, and the walls began closing together. But instead of the crushing panic I expected, I felt something else: peace. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The creature made one last desperate grab for me, but its claws passed right through me like I was the ghost. Now it was fading, becoming transparent, losing the power my guilt had given it. "This isn't over," it whispered in a voice that was barely there. "Yeah, it is," I said, and triggered the last charge. The chamber collapsed completely, tons of rock sealing off the passages and crushing the space where the creature had been. I was trapped now, buried under more stone than any rescue team could move. But I could hear the Henderson family through my radio. They'd made it out. They were safe. "Ranger Station 7, this is Tyler Henderson. We're out of the caves. The ranger saved us, but he's still down there. You have to help him." I tried to respond, but my radio was damaged and crackling with static. All I could do was listen to the voices of living people calling for help, instead of the voices of the dead calling for revenge. In the darkness under all that rock, I wasn't afraid anymore. I thought about Sophia and how I'd keep my promise to come home safe, even if it took a while. I thought about the Henderson family eating dinner together that night, their kids telling the story of how a ranger had saved them from something in the dark. And I thought about my squad, the guys who died in those tunnels so long ago. For the first time since Vietnam, I could remember them without guilt, without that crushing weight of failure. They were gone, but they were at peace now, just like I was. My radio crackled one more time. "Papa, Papa, come home." Sophia's voice, live this time, not a recording. Somehow she was reaching me across all that rock and distance and darkness. "I'm coming home, baby girl," I whispered. "Papa's coming home." They pulled me out 3 days later. The rescue team said it was impossible. No one could survive that long under tons of collapsed limestone. But when they followed the Henderson family's directions to where the chamber had been, they found me in a small air pocket, unconscious but breathing. I don't remember much about those 3 days. Sometimes I think I dreamed them, but they felt real at the time. I dreamed about walking through tunnels that led to bright places instead of dark ones. I dreamed about my squad from Vietnam, and they weren't angry anymore. They were just guys I'd served with, guys who'd done their job and moved on to whatever comes after. Mostly, I dreamed about Sophia waiting for me at the mouth of the cave, her small hand reaching into the darkness to pull me toward the light. The doctors said I had a concussion and some broken ribs, but nothing that wouldn't heal. They kept asking me about hallucinations, about whether I'd seen things that weren't there during the rescue. I told them the truth. I'd seen plenty of things that weren't there, but not during the rescue. During the rescue, everything had been exactly as real as it needed to be. The Henderson family visited me in the hospital. The kids had drawn me pictures of superheroes, and Mrs. Henderson had baked cookies that tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. They wanted to know what had happened in the caves, what had chased them and made those scratches in the stone. Sometimes people get lost in the dark, I told them. Sometimes they see things that aren't really there. The important thing is that you're all safe now. Tyler looked at me with serious 80-year-old eyes and said, "But you saw it too, didn't you? The big thing with the red eyes." "I saw a lot of things down there," I said, "but the only thing that mattered was getting you home to your family." After they left, I sat in my hospital bed thinking about what had really happened in those caves. The official report said the family had gotten lost during the storm and taken shelter in an unstable part of the cave system. The collapse had been caused by recent seismic activity in the region. Case closed. But I knew better. I knew that sometimes the things we carry inside us can become real enough to hurt people. I knew that guilt and fear and old trauma can take on a life of their own if we let them grow strong enough in the dark. I also knew that love was stronger than any of those things. Love for a daughter who needed her father to come home. Love for a family that deserved to be saved. Love for the memory of good men who died doing their duty, without any need for guilt or blame. When they released me from the hospital, Sophia was waiting with her grandmother. She ran into my arms like I'd been gone for years instead of days, and when I held her, I realized something had changed. The tight feeling in my chest was gone. The panic that used to grab me in small spaces had loosened its hold. I was still a ranger, still doing search and rescue in the Olympic National Forest. But now, when I went into caves, I went with purpose. Instead of fear, I went to save people, not to punish myself for people I couldn't save. The caves at Whisper Caverns were sealed off after the collapse, marked as too dangerous for civilian exploration. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, hikers report hearing sounds from inside, not scary sounds, but voices calling out directions to help lost travelers find their way home. I never heard those voices myself, but I liked knowing they were there. It made me think that maybe the dead don't always come back to haunt us. Maybe sometimes they come back to help. The nightmares about Vietnam stopped after that. Instead, I started having dreams about Sophia when she was older, maybe 20 or 25, wearing a ranger uniform of her own. In the dreams, she was leading people out of dark places and into the light, just like her old man had taught her. When I told her about those dreams, she smiled and said, "Don't worry, Papa. If you ever get lost in the dark, I'll come find you." And I believed her. After everything I'd seen in those caves, after facing down my own guilt and fear and coming out the other side, I believed that love could light up any darkness, no matter how deep or old or scary it might be. The forest was still dangerous. There were still real things in those woods that could hurt people, bears and mountain lions and sudden storms that could kill you if you weren't careful. But the worst monsters, the ones that lived inside us, those could be defeated. You just had to be willing to face them in the dark and remember that somewhere in the light, people were waiting for you to come home.